The weight of the secret. Swan had been carrying a heavy burden for years. A mistake from his past, a decision he made that he couldn't undo, haunted him every single day. His wife Sarah had no idea about this secret that had been eating away at him. They had built a beautiful life together, a happy family, but John's heart was weighed down by guilt. Each day, the silence between them grew heavier, and he couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. Although their marriage had always been strong, there was a distance John couldn't ignore anymore. He was terrified that the secret he kept buried deep inside would destroy everything they had built. Sarah had been the perfect partner, caring, loving, and supportive. Yet John had lied to her in a way that he couldn't take back. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at his peace, and the fear of what would happen if he ever confessed kept him awake at night. For years, he had tried to convince himself that the secret was something he could live with, that Sarah would never find out. But as the years passed, the weight of the lie grew heavier, and it became harder to look into her eyes without feeling like a fraud. He loved her more than anything, but his silence was beginning to suffocate him. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Sarah leaned over and placed her hand gently on his. He could feel her warmth, her trust, but all he could think about was how unworthy he felt. Her eyes, full of love, made him want to confess everything, to take the burden off his shoulders. But he remained silent, a knot in his throat, unable to speak. John knew he couldn't keep living like this. He couldn't continue to be haunted by his past mistakes, and he certainly couldn't keep lying to the one person who meant everything to him. But how could he tell Sarah the truth? How could he tear down the walls that had been built around their relationship for so long? He didn't know if she would forgive him or if she would even stay by his side after hearing what he had done. The fear of losing her was overwhelming, and yet he knew the secret was too much to carry alone any longer. As the days passed, the weight of his guilt grew heavier. He couldn't focus on anything else. He had to tell her. He had to find the strength to speak the truth, even if it meant risking everything. But every time he thought about confessing, his mind raced with doubts. What if she left him? What if the truth shattered everything they had built? And yet, deep down, John already knew that holding on to this secret was worse than any possible consequence. He had to let it out. He sat at his desk one night, staring at a blank piece of paper. The words he had been rehearsing in his head for so long were stuck. He couldn't find the right way to say it. He wanted to tell Sarah that he was sorry, that he had been living a lie, but the fear of how she would react held him back. The truth was, John was terrified. Terrified of losing the woman he loved. Terrified of the judgment, the disappointment. But more than anything, he was terrified of continuing to live with this secret, this burden without the chance to heal. He couldn't carry it any longer. He knew it was time to speak. And so, as he sat in the quiet of their home, John realized that the hardest part wasn't telling Sarah the truth. It was finding the courage to let go of the fear. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful they might be. The first step was simple. He had to speak, the quiet before the storm. John stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection, his mind racing. The words he had been rehearsing in his head felt heavy, like a burden he could barely carry. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms sweaty. This wasn't just any conversation. It was the conversation that could change everything. The conversation that would either make or break his relationship with Sarah. For years, he had kept his secret locked away, hidden behind a veil of silence. The weight of it had built up over time, and now, with each passing day, it became harder to ignore. He knew he had to confess, but the fear of Sarah's reaction paralyzed him. He could already imagine the shock in her eyes, the disbelief. Would she leave him? Would she ever look at him the same way again? But deep down, John knew that silence would only prolong the pain. He had carried the secret for too long, and it was slowly eating away at him. The guilt, the shame, the fear, it had become a part of him, a constant companion. And yet, as he stood there in the quiet of their home, he realized that the longer he waited, the harder it would be. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing inside John. The sound of her humming a familiar tune reached his ears, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. She was still the woman he loved, the woman he had shared his life with for so many years. And yet, the weight of his secret loomed large, casting a shadow over their peaceful existence. John walked into the kitchen, his feet dragging with every step. He tried to steady his breath, but it felt like there was a lump in his throat, choking him. Sarah looked at him, a warm smile on her face, and for a moment, he almost forgot why he had come in. How could he bring this up? How could he ruin everything with the truth that had haunted him for so long? "John, you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice soft with concern. "You look a little off." John forced a smile, trying to act normal, but inside his heart was racing. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired." She nodded, sensing that something was wrong, but not pressing him further. She always gave him space when he needed it. But the truth was, John wasn't just tired. He was terrified, terrified of what would happen when he finally told her what he had been hiding. His eyes lingered on her face, on the way her eyes sparkled with kindness, on the way her lips curved into a gentle smile. How could he do this to her? How could he bring this secret into the light and risk destroying everything? But then a thought crossed his mind. Maybe it wasn't about destroying everything. Maybe it was about finally finding peace for both of them. Maybe this confession, no matter how painful, was the only way to truly heal. He had spent years avoiding it, but now it was time to face it. "I need to talk to you about something," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel the tension building, the storm ready to break. Sarah stopped what she was doing and turned to face him, concern filling her eyes. "Of course, what is it?" Her voice was warm, comforting, but John could see the slight furrow in her brow. She could tell something was wrong, but she didn't know the weight of it yet. John took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. This was it, the moment he had been dreading for so long, the moment that would change everything. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He looked down at the floor, feeling like the weight of his past mistake was pressing down on him. How could he find the right words? How could he make her understand the pain he had carried all these years? Sarah stepped closer to him, her hand gently resting on his arm. "John, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, he saw the vulnerability in her gaze. She was just as afraid as he was, afraid of what this confession might mean. But he also saw something else. Love. She loved him, and despite everything, she was still here, still willing to listen. I made a mistake, Sarah," John finally said, his voice trembling. "A big one. And I've been hiding it from you for a long time. I can't carry it anymore. I need to tell you the truth." The room fell silent. Sarah's hand tightened around his arm, her eyes searching his face for any hint of what he was about to say. The air between them was thick with tension, and John could feel his heart racing faster than ever. He had already stepped into the storm. Now there was no turning back. "I've been keeping a secret from you," he continued, his voice breaking. "Something I did that I should have told you about a long time ago. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you." Sarah stood still, her expression unreadable, as she waited for him to explain. John could see the worry in her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. She was giving him the space to say what he needed to say. And in that moment, he realized that this was what he had been afraid of all along. The silence, the unknown. But now the truth was out there, and whatever happened next, he knew it was the only way forward. The moment of truth, John could feel the weight of his confession hanging heavily in the air. His words, though simple, felt like they were dripping with the weight of years of secrets, regrets, and untold truths. Sarah stood before him, her eyes wide, filled with concern and confusion. Her hand still rested gently on his arm, as if grounding him, but the tension between them was palpable. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. The house, once filled with warmth and comfort, felt distant and cold, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. John took another deep breath, gathering what little courage he had left. The silence stretched on, each passing second more uncomfortable than the last. He could feel his heart pounding against his chest, his palms damp with sweat. His mouth felt dry, and his thoughts seemed scattered, racing with everything he wanted to say, but unsure how to say it. "Sarah," he began, his voice a mere whisper, "I've been hiding something from you for a long time. Something I should have told you the moment it happened, but I didn't. I was scared. I thought I could deal with it on my own, but now I see that I can't anymore. I have to tell you, you deserve to know the truth." Sarah took a small step forward, her face softening with empathy. She had always been the calm in his storm, the one person who could bring him back from his darkest thoughts. But today her eyes were searching, trying to make sense of the weight behind his words. She had always trusted him, loved him, and yet now something felt different. Something was off. "What is it, John?" Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of fear in it. "You're scaring me." John shook his head, his eyes closing briefly as if bracing for what he was about to say. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. He was about to strip away the layers of protection he had built around himself, and he wasn't sure how much of himself would remain after. It's about the affair I had," John finally said, the words spilling out like a floodgate opening. "A long time ago. I never told you about it, and I should have. It was a mistake, one that has haunted me for years. I've carried it with me, buried it deep, thinking that it was something I could forget. But I can't forget it, Sarah, and I can't keep living with this secret anymore." The room felt as though it had frozen. Sarah's hand slipped from his arm, and her body stiffened. John watched as her face paled, her expression unreadable. He immediately regretted speaking, wishing he could take the words back, rewind the moment, and find another way. But it was too late. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt like a weight pressing down on them, suffocating them. John could hear his own breath, shallow and erratic. His chest tightened and his stomach churned. What was she thinking? Was she angry? Was she going to walk away? Or was she going to stay, just like she had always promised him? Then Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the weight of her own thoughts. She exhaled slowly, her gaze never leaving his. It wasn't the anger that John had expected, Nor was it the rejection he feared. Instead, there was only sadness, a profound sadness that seemed to cut through the air between them. Why, she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why didn't you tell me before, John? We've been through so much together. Why keep this from me? Her question hit John like a punch to the gut. He had no answer. How could he explain the fear he had felt? The shame that had kept him silent for so long? The guilt that had consumed him, leaving him unable to speak? How could he explain that? In his mind, it seemed easier to carry this alone than to risk shattering everything they had built together. I was ashamed, he whispered. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want you to see me as someone I'm not. I thought if I kept it hidden, everything would be okay, that we could just move forward. But now I see how wrong I was. Tears began to well up in Sarah's eyes, but she didn't break down. She stood there silent for a moment, processing what John had just said. The room was heavy with the weight of their unspoken words. John felt as though he had opened a floodgate, and now all he could do was stand there and wait for Sarah to process the confession. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice quieter but still firm. John, this is a lot. I don't know what to say yet. I need time. I need time to think about everything, to understand what this means for us. John nodded, understanding completely. He didn't expect forgiveness right away, and he didn't know if he deserved it. He just needed Sarah to know the truth. He needed to face his own mistakes, even if it meant risking everything. I'll give you all the time you need, John said, his voice raw. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just needed to tell you. I couldn't live with this secret anymore. Sarah wiped the tears from her eyes and took a step back. I need space, John. I need to think. He watched as she walked toward the door, and his heart broke at the thought of what might come next. Was this the beginning of the end, or was it the start of something new? He didn't know, but he knew that whatever happened, it was a step in the right direction. At least, for the first time in years, the truth was out. The aftermath of vulnerability, the days after John's confession, were the longest of his life. The silence between him and Sarah felt like an endless void, a place where no words could reach them. They still shared the same space, but it was as if they were living in parallel worlds, never truly connecting. Every morning, John would wake up and find Sarah already up, quietly preparing breakfast, her movements mechanical, almost like a routine she was performing without truly being present. John tried to talk to her, tried to offer his support, but every time he opened his mouth, it felt like he was pushing her further away. She wasn't angry, not in the way he had feared. Instead, it was as though she was processing everything in her own time, in her own way. She would nod, answer his questions, but her eyes always seemed distant, as if her mind was miles away, grappling with the reality of his betrayal. One evening after dinner, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was calm but heavy with emotion. I've been thinking a lot, John. I need to understand why. Not just what happened, but why you did it. I need to know why you kept this from me for so long. John felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had been waiting for this moment. The moment when she would ask for the answers he had been dreading to give. He had wanted to confess, to apologize, and to take responsibility for his actions. But now, in the quiet of their living room, he realized that answering her question was more difficult than he ever imagined. He took a deep breath and looked into her eyes. I was selfish. I thought I could get away with it, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. But the truth is, I was too ashamed to admit what I had done. I was afraid of losing you, so I buried it. thinking that maybe it would just disappear. But it didn't. It only made things worse. Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving his. I get that, John. I understand the fear, but it doesn't make what you did okay. I trusted you. You were my partner, my best friend, and you lied to me. You kept me in the dark, even though I deserved to know the truth. John's throat tightened as he listened to her words. The pain in her voice cut deeper than any words of anger could have. I know, and I can't change that. I can't take back what I did, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was just afraid. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah sat there, her fingers intertwined in her lap, her head tilted down. John could see that she was struggling, processing everything he had just said. It was clear that the wounds he had caused weren't just physical, they were emotional, deep, and would take time to heal. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Sarah said softly, her voice barely a whisper. But the fact that you kept this from me for so long, it's going to take time for me to trust you again. John nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He knew that regaining her trust would take more than just words. It would take time, patience, and most importantly, actions. He had already broken her trust, and now he had to prove that he was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild it, even if it meant starting from scratch. I'll do whatever it takes, Sarah. I'll wait for you as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to give up on us. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked to the window, gazing out into the night. John stood behind her, not daring to speak, afraid that if he did, he might say the wrong thing. The night air outside was cool, and the world felt so still, as though it too was waiting for something to shift, to change. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Sarah said finally, turning to face him. Her voice was steady, but there was a sadness in her eyes that John had never seen before. But I'm not giving up on us either. I just need time, John. I need time to figure out what this means for me, for us. John felt a flicker of hope. She hadn't closed the door. She hadn't given up. But he knew the road ahead would not be easy. It wouldn't be a quick fix, and it would require patience, something he had never been very good at. But for Sarah, for their relationship, he would try. He would prove to her that he was worthy of her trust once more. I understand, John said quietly, and I'll be here no matter how long it takes. I'll give you all the time you need. Sarah nodded, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. A small, fragile smile that made John's heart swell with a mixture of hope and sorrow. He wasn't sure what the future held, but at that moment, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to heal together. Healing through compassion. As the days passed, the silence between John and Sarah began to take on a new shape. It wasn't the deep, suffocating silence that had hung over their heads for the first few days after his confession. No, this was a quieter silence, one that spoke of reflection, of space needed for healing. It was the kind of silence that allowed Sarah to process, to think about everything that had been said and done, without the pressure of immediate action or words. John knew that his actions had hurt her deeply, and even though Sarah hadn't said it outright, he could see it in the way she carried herself, the way she still hesitated before answering him, the way she would turn away whenever their eyes met for too long. Her heart was broken, and that was something John couldn't fix with a simple apology. He had to show her, through his actions, that he was willing to do whatever it took to earn back her trust. For the first time in his life, John understood what true vulnerability meant. It wasn't just about admitting a mistake. It was about opening yourself up completely, exposing your heart and soul, and letting the person you love see every raw, broken part of you. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take if it meant giving their love a chance to heal. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Sarah did something that surprised John. She sat down next to him on the couch, her body language more relaxed than it had been in days. She didn't say anything at first, but simply sat there, her hand resting on the arm of the couch. John glanced over at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see that she was still guarded, but there was something else in her eyes now, something that hinted at the possibility of moving forward. "I've been thinking," Sarah said quietly, her voice still tinged with uncertainty, "about what you said and how we move forward from here." John turned to face her, his eyes full of hope. He wanted to respond, but he held back. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about giving Sarah the space she needed to express herself, to figure out what she needed. So he stayed silent, letting her take the lead. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, John," Sarah continued, her gaze soft but firm. "But I know that I can't move forward if I keep carrying this anger and hurt around. I don't want to live with that weight." John nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He understood. He knew that healing wasn't just about him doing the right thing. It was about both of them working through their pain together. It was about understanding that forgiveness, when it came, would be a process, one that would require patience, empathy, and compassion. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Sarah," John said, his voice steady but full of vulnerability. "I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I'm here every step of the way. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, and if you can't forgive me yet, I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need." Sarah looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she reached over and placed her hand on his. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. John felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a sign that Sarah wasn't closing herself off completely. She was willing to try. She was willing to heal. "I'm not sure where this is going, John," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." John's heart swelled with gratitude. "You won't lose me. I promise you, I'll do everything I can to show you that I'm worth your trust." In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't an immediate fix, but it was a beginning of understanding, of compassion, and of healing. They both knew that the road ahead would be long, filled with ups and downs, but for the first time in days, there was a sense of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and John began to rebuild the relationship, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, moments where the past would resurface, but they were learning to navigate those moments together. Sarah started to open up more, sharing her feelings, her fears, and her doubts. John listened, patiently and without interruption, offering the support Sarah needed to process everything she had been through. John learned that healing wasn't just about saying the right words. It was about being present, being patient, and showing through his actions that he was committed to change. Every small gesture, every act of kindness, every moment of vulnerability helped rebuild the foundation of their relationship. The weight of forgiveness, the days after Sarah had reached out to John with that small gesture of reconciliation, were slow and uncertain. but they were also filled with small moments of hope. They still had a long way to go, but Sarah had shown him that there was still a chance for healing, a chance for them to rebuild. But while there was hope, there was also a heavy burden. John could feel it every day, every time he looked at Sarah, every time he tried to hold her hand or offer comfort. The weight of what he had done was still present between them, lingering in the air like an invisible barrier. He could see it in Sarah's eyes, the pain she was still carrying, the part of her heart that hadn't fully healed yet. And it was then that John realized something he hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't just about the person being forgiven. It was about the one doing the forgiving as well. It was about letting go of the pain, the anger, the hurt, and giving the space to heal. It was a burden Sarah had to carry as much as he had to carry his own guilt. One evening, Sarah and John sat in the living room together, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable but thoughtful. They had made progress, but it was still fragile. John knew that they needed to talk about forgiveness. It was a conversation they had avoided, not out of fear, but because it felt too big, too overwhelming. But tonight the time had come. John, Tara began, her voice low and steady, I've been thinking about something. She paused as if gathering her thoughts. Forgiveness. I don't know if I'm ready to fully forgive you yet, but I think I understand now that forgiveness is as much for me as it is for you. John looked at her, his heart in his throat. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had expected her to tell him she wasn't sure, that she needed more time. But the honesty in her voice, the calm acceptance of where she was in her own journey, moved him deeply. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Sarah, John said quietly, and I don't want you to feel pressured to. I've broken your trust, and I know that it's not something that can be fixed overnight. I'll be here working every day to show you that I'm committed to making it right. Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. I know, and I appreciate that. But I've realized something over the past few weeks. I've been holding on to a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, and I've been using it to keep myself distant, to protect myself from getting hurt again. But I think I've reached the point where I'm ready to let go of that anger. Not for you, but for me. I don't want to carry it anymore. John felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was mixed with a deep sense of gratitude. Sarah wasn't just forgiving him. She was forgiving herself. She was choosing to release the pain for her own sake, to set herself free from the heavy burden of resentment. I can't just forget what happened, John, Sarah continued, her voice steady. But I'm starting to realize that holding on to the anger doesn't help either of us. It only keeps me from healing, and I need to heal for both of us. John felt his chest tighten as he reached for her hand. Sarah, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend every day of my life earning it. I'll show you that I'm worthy of your trust, that I can be the man you deserve. They sat together in the quiet of their home, their hands intertwined, the weight of their shared experience hanging in the air. It wasn't an easy moment, nor was it a perfect one, but it was real. It was the beginning of something new, something fragile and beautiful, the beginning of healing. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a magic word that would fix everything. It was a process, a long and difficult one that would require time, patience, and understanding. But for the first time since his confession, John felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. They were on it together. Rebuilding trust, the road to reconnection. Rebuilding trust was never going to be easy. John knew that, and Sarah knew it too. But what they had both realized over the past few weeks was that trust was not something that could be restored in a single conversation, nor in a single action. It was a long, winding road that required consistency, patience, and most of all, time. Sarah was still processing everything, and John understood that. He didn't expect her to just let go of the past and forgive him immediately, but he could see the subtle shifts in her behavior, the way she would look at him with a little more warmth in her eyes, the way she would talk to him with a little more trust. It was slow, but it was progress. One morning, Sarah came to him with something that had been weighing on her heart. They had been having more open conversations lately, small talks about everyday life, but this time it was different. This was the conversation that marked the real beginning of their journey back to each other. John, Sarah said, her voice calm but determined, I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about forgiveness and everything we've been going through. And I need to tell you something. John turned to her, his heart beating a little faster. What is it? She took a deep breath before continuing. I think I'm ready to trust you again, but it's going to take time. It's going to take more than just saying the right things, and it's going to take more than just doing things to make up for what happened. I need to feel it. I need to see it. I need to feel like I'm safe, like you're really here for me. Not just for a week, not just for a month, but for the long haul. John nodded, his heart full of understanding. This was exactly what he needed to hear. He knew this wouldn't be an overnight fix, but hearing Sarah's words gave him hope. She was opening the door again, and he was ready to step through it, but only if he was willing to prove himself every single day. I know, John said, his voice steady. I've made a promise to you already, and I'm going to keep it. I'll show you, Sarah. I'll show you that I'm here for the long haul. I'll do whatever it takes. Sarah gave him a small, tentative smile, her eyes softening just a little. I don't expect perfection, John. I just need to know that we can move forward, that I can trust you again, and that you'll be patient with me while I learn to trust you again. The vulnerability in her voice struck John deep. He realized how much it had cost her to say those words, how much courage it took to even open the door to reconciliation. For the first time since his confession, he truly understood the depth of what he had done and how much work lay ahead. The next few days were a mix of hope and struggle. John did everything he could to show Sarah that he was committed. He didn't just say the words, he backed them up with his actions. Small things, like checking in with her more often, offering his support in little ways, and giving her space when she needed it, all of these things began to add up. He knew that it was the consistency, not the grand gestures, that would rebuild her trust. Sarah, on the other hand, was still cautious. She didn't want to rush into things, didn't want to set herself up for more heartbreak. But slowly she began to notice the changes. John was there when she needed him, and when she felt overwhelmed, he would sit with her in silence, offering his presence without pressure. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. One evening after dinner, Sarah surprised John by sitting down next to him on the couch, just as she had done weeks ago. But this time she didn't look at him with the same guarded expression. She looked at him with a soft smile, and for the first time in a long time, John felt a sense of peace between them. Thank you, she said quietly, for giving me time, for being patient with me. John turned to her, his heart swelling with gratitude. I'll always be patient with you, Sarah. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. We're in this together, no matter how long it takes. The words felt true. He knew they were true. They had a long road ahead of them, and there were still many moments of doubt and fear. But John and Sarah were both committed to doing the work, to facing their pain together, and to rebuilding what had been broken. They were not the same people they were before the confession, but in many ways they were stronger, more vulnerable, and more honest with each other than they had ever been. They were learning that love wasn't just about the good times, it was about being there for each other through the toughest moments, about showing up even when it was hard, and about never giving up, no matter how much the road seemed to stretch ahead. A new beginning, the days of silence and uncertainty were slowly fading away. What remained in their wake was not the same relationship that John and Sarah had before, but something deeper, more resilient. They had been through the storm, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, it felt like they were finally beginning to rebuild something new, something stronger. Sarah had been giving John more of herself, more trust, more willingness to move forward. She was no longer holding back in fear of being hurt again. Every day, John proved through his actions that he was committed to earning her trust. And though the process had been slow, Sarah could see the changes in him, and she knew that, for the first time in a long while, they were truly working as a team. They spent evenings talking about the past, but instead of blaming each other, they focused on understanding each other's pain. John listened, really listened, as Sarah shared the emotional toll his betrayal had taken on her. It wasn't easy for her, but she was beginning to open up more, to trust that John wasn't just hearing her, but listening to her, truly taking her feelings to heart. John, on the other hand, began to confront his own fears. He realized that for so many years he had been afraid of vulnerability. He had kept his secret because he thought it would protect everyone. But in truth, it had only built a wall between him and the woman he loved. The act of confessing had been terrifying, but it had been the key to his own healing. He was learning that it wasn't just about apologizing, it was about showing up, day in and day out, and doing the hard work to make things right. One afternoon, Sarah suggested they go for a walk in the park, something they used to do when they first started dating. It felt like a step back to a simpler time, a time before all the pain and uncertainty had crept in. John agreed without hesitation, eager to reconnect, eager to rebuild. As they walked side by side, the cool breeze brushing against their skin, they talked about their hopes for the future. The small things like planning a vacation or redecorating the house. And the big things, like what they wanted their relationship to look like after everything had happened. There was still a long way to go, but the weight of the past no longer felt as heavy. It was as though the healing process had already begun in ways both small and profound. Do you think we'll ever get back to how things were? Sarah asked, her voice soft, a little unsure. John paused, taking her hand in his, squeezing it gently. No, he said quietly. I don't think we'll go back to how things were before. But I think we can be better. I think we can be stronger. I think we can learn how to love each other in a way we never did before. Because now we really see each other. We're not hiding anything anymore. Sarah looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. You're right, she said, her voice full of conviction. We're different now, and maybe that's a good thing. We've learned to trust each other in ways we never had to before. The air between them felt different now. It was lighter, less burdened. There was a newfound sense of understanding and intimacy. For the first time since the confession, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Hope that, while the past would always be a part of their story, it didn't have to define their future. As they continued walking through the park, hand in hand, it was clear to both of them that the journey wasn't over, but they were ready to face it together. Their love was no longer just built on trust, but on something deeper: vulnerability, honesty, and the willingness to grow together no matter what came their way. For the first time in a long while, John felt at peace. He had made the hardest confession of his life, and though the consequences had been painful, they had also opened the door to something new, something beautiful: the possibility of a love rebuilt from the ground up. And for Sarah, there was finally a sense of peace too. She had allowed herself to let go of the anger and the hurt, and in return, she had found a love that was stronger, more authentic, and more real than it had ever been before. They had found something in each other that they hadn't even realized was missing: a deep, unshakable connection built on the foundation of shared pain, vulnerability, and a commitment to grow together. And as they walked together in the park, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, as equals, with the strength of their love carrying them forward. Healing through generosity, giving the gift of love. As the weeks passed, the space between John and Sarah continued to shift. What had once been a tense silence, heavy with unresolved pain and uncertainty, had slowly evolved into a space where they both could breathe together. But healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey that they both had to walk day by day, step by step. And for the first time in months, John felt like they were making progress, not just as individuals, but as a couple. But there was still one thing they hadn't addressed yet, something that had been quietly lingering beneath the surface of their renewed connection: the importance of giving, of loving, but without expecting anything in return. It was an unspoken truth that neither John nor Sarah had fully embraced, but both were beginning to realize that the act of giving love, of being generous in spirit, would be essential for their continued healing. It started small, the way they began to care for each other in new ways. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping declarations of love anymore. It was about the quiet acts of kindness that often went unnoticed but spoke volumes. Sarah, for instance, started preparing John's favorite meals again, not because she had to, but because she knew it would make him feel loved, seen, and appreciated. John, on the other hand, began taking on more of the household responsibilities, not because Sarah asked him to, but because he wanted to show her that he was committed to doing his part, to making her feel supported. One evening after they had finished dinner, Sarah turned to John with a thoughtful expression on her face. She had something she wanted to share, something that had been on her heart for a while now. "John, I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft. "You've shown me so much patience and love these past few weeks, and I can see that you're truly trying. But I want to do something for you too. I know that I haven't been the easiest person to be around lately, and I've been so focused on my own hurt that I haven't always taken the time to show you how much I appreciate you." John looked at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "Sarah, you don't have to apologize. I know how hard this has been for you, and I'm grateful that you're still here with me, that we're still here together." Sarah smiled, her eyes softening. "I know, but that's not enough for me anymore. I've realized something. I've been so focused on what I've lost that I've forgotten to appreciate what I still have: you. And I want to give more to you, not just in words, but in actions. I want to show you how much you mean to me, how much I've learned from you, and how much I love you." John felt a tear well up in his eye as he listened to her. Sarah had always been a woman of strength, but hearing her speak like this, so openly and vulnerably, was a gift. It wasn't just about the apology or the forgiveness. It was about the realization that both of them had been so focused on their own pain that they had forgotten to give love to each other in the small, everyday ways. Sarah, you don't have to do anything, John said. His voice choked with emotion. I know you love me. I feel it. I see it in everything you do, in the way you care for me. That's enough. But Sarah shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. No, John, love isn't just about feeling it. It's about giving it. And I want to give you all the love I have. I want to make up for the time I spent being closed off, being angry, being hurt. And I want to do it by showing you, by giving you something I never gave you before, my whole heart. In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about building something new. They were no longer just trying to move forward from the betrayal. They were creating something from the ashes of their pain. It was a bond that was stronger than ever before, forged not in perfection, but in forgiveness, vulnerability, and the generosity of spirit. The next few weeks were filled with small, meaningful acts of love. A handwritten note left on the kitchen counter, a surprise date night planned by John, a moment when Sarah held John in her arms and whispered how grateful she was for him. It wasn't the grand gestures that mattered anymore. It was the consistency, the willingness to show up for each other in everyday ways. And as John sat beside Sarah one night, watching her laugh as they shared a glass of wine, he realized that what he had feared losing was never truly gone. Their love wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real, stronger for having been tested, and deeper because of the pain they had both experienced. I think we're doing it, Sarah, John said, his voice filled with awe. We're healing. We're starting over. But this time, we're doing it together. And I can't imagine doing it with anyone else. Sarah looked at him, her smile genuine and full of love. Neither can I, John. Neither can I. The final gift. Moving forward together. As the days passed, John and Sarah found themselves settling into a new rhythm. They were no longer haunted by the heavy silence that had once filled their home, nor were they constantly looking over their shoulders, afraid that the past would resurface to tear them apart. Instead, there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding between them that they were moving forward together. Sarah had come to understand something profound about love during these months. Love, she realized, was not always easy. It wasn't always about the good times or the happy moments. Love was about the struggles, the mistakes, and the courage to face those challenges together. It was about showing up every single day, even when it felt impossible, and choosing each other despite the difficulties. John, too, had learned valuable lessons. He had learned that honesty wasn't just about confessing wrongdoings, it was about vulnerability. It was about allowing yourself to be seen for who you truly were, flaws and all, and trusting that the person you loved would see you not as broken, but as someone worthy of love and forgiveness. His actions now spoke louder than words. He wasn't just apologizing for his past mistakes. He was actively working to be the man Sarah deserved. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the sky bathed in the soft colors of sunset, Sarah turned to John, her voice full of warmth and quiet gratitude. You know, she began, her eyes reflecting the fading light, I've been thinking a lot about where we are now, and I'm amazed at how far we've come. There was a time when I thought we wouldn't make it, when I thought the damage was too much to overcome. John reached out and took her hand, his heart swelling with a mixture of love and appreciation. I never thought I'd be able to repair the hurt I caused, he said softly, his voice sincere. But I've learned something important. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about moving forward together, one step at a time. It's about showing up doing the work and never giving up on each other. Sarah smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief, of letting go. She had carried the weight of their past for so long, and now, for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again. You've shown me that love isn't just about perfection. It's about being real. And in a way, I think our love is stronger now because we've been through this. Because we've been willing to be vulnerable, to face the truth, and to rebuild. John kissed her forehead gently, holding her close. We've both learned so much. But there's one thing I know for sure. I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me. I want to give you all the love I have every single day. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. This was their final step in healing, not because the pain was gone, but because they had finally learned to embrace each other's flaws, to share their vulnerabilities, and to trust again. And that was the greatest gift they could give each other, the gift of moving forward together. In the months that followed, they continued to grow, to heal, and to share their lives in ways they never had before. The scars from their past were still there, but they were no longer something that defined them. Instead, those scars became part of the story of their love, a love that had been tested, broken, and rebuilt. And in that rebuilding, they had found something more profound than they had ever imagined. As they sat together hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they realized that love wasn't about the perfection of the relationship, but about the imperfections they were willing to accept in each other. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the easy days. It was about the everyday moments, the small acts of kindness, the willingness to listen, the patience to let things unfold at their own pace. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, John and Sarah knew they were on the same path, walking side by side, ready to face whatever challenges the future held, together. Their love had been tested, but it had not been broken. And as they embraced, they knew that the final gift they had given each other wasn't forgiveness or forgetfulness. It was something far more powerful, the ability to rebuild, to grow, and to love again, with all the rawness, vulnerability, and authenticity that made their bond unbreakable.